Well, it has become known exactly what kind of weapon Volodymyr Zelenskyy requested from Donald Trump for an attack on the Kremlin if Putin does not stop the war and continues attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. The day before, Volodymyr Zelenskyy stated that Russian officials in the Kremlin should check if they know where the nearest bomb shelter is. After all, Ukraine may strike the Kremlin if the Russians continue attacks on Ukraine's energy system. And supposedly, Donald Trump supported this idea and even discussed with Zelenskyy the transfer of powerful long-range weapons for this strike. Moreover, Zelenskyy directly said that Ukraine might not even use these weapons against Moscow. But the very fact of having such missiles might make Putin reconsider and finally sit down at the negotiating table. And today it became known that Zelenskyy, during a closed meeting with Donald Trump, asked to provide Ukraine with Tomahawk missiles with a range of 1,600 kilometers. But did Donald Trump agree to this? We'll discuss it in this episode. My name is Alexei Pechi. Before we start this episode, let me remind you that on this YouTube channel, several news and analytical stories about events around the world are released every day, so that you can stay up to date with absolutely all the news. That's why I recommend subscribing to this YouTube channel and maybe sharing this episode on your social networks. I would appreciate it. And be sure to write detailed comments under this video so that as many viewers as possible can see this episode. So, recently Volodymyr Zelenskyy said in an interview with Axios that there is a weapon system whose appearance in Ukraine could speed up the end of the war. United States President Donald Trump is already aware of it. Zelenskyy confirmed that Ukrainian drones are capable of striking deep into Russian territory, creating additional strategic pressure on our enemy. But he noted that there is another weapon system that he would like to obtain. According to him, having it could really speed up the end of this war. Here's a quote from Zelenskyy. President Trump knows I told him yesterday that we only need one thing. We need it, but that doesn't mean we will use it. Because if we get it, I think it will put additional pressure on Putin to sit down and talk. Well, that's how it is today. The Telegraph reports that during a closed meeting with Donald Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy requested Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine. Zelenskyy told Trump that this weapon would help force the Russian bold dictator Vladimir Putin to sit down at the negotiating table to discuss a peace agreement. He said that this bunker rat named Vladimir Putin would simply be afraid for his life. That indeed a Tomahawk could hit somewhere in the Kremlin and accordingly he would run away. He would quickly sit down, negotiate something instead of continuing this bloody war. According to the publication, the request was made during a meeting between the two leaders on the sidelines of the United Nations session and was considered extremely positive. Moreover, there were hints that Trump might even agree to this. They say that it is precisely his statement that Ukraine can win and reclaim the territory seized by the Russians that indicates his determination. With a range of 1,600 kilometers and a warhead weighing 450 kilograms, this cruise missile is much more effective than any similar long-range weapon provided by Western allies. However, it is worth recalling that former United States President Joe Biden rejected a similar request, which was part of the 10-point victory plan presented by Volodymyr Zelenskyy during Joe Biden's term. But at that time, the delivery of long-range missiles was considered too risky since they could strike targets in Moscow and would likely be able to bypass the most advanced systems. But it was believed that the delivery of long-range missiles was considered risky since they could strike targets in Moscow. It was believed that the delivery of long-range missiles could strike targets in Moscow and probably modern systems as well. It was believed The delivery of long-range missiles is considered risky because they can bypass modern systems. It was believed that the delivery of long-range missiles was acknowledged because of modern systems. But unfortunately, as Axios writes today, according to a source familiar with the process, Tomahawk was the only weapon system on the list that Trump did not agree to sell to NATO countries for further transfer to Ukraine. They say that in Washington there are still fears of escalation on the one hand, and on the other that the United States Army itself doesn't have such large stockpiles of this missile. But Axios reminds us that Ukraine has already tried to bypass its partners' reluctance to provide long-range weapons by developing its own systems, such as Polyanitsia and Flamingo. Although, of course, they don't have the years of experience with Tomahawks. That's why experts suggest that the United States may not transfer the Tomahawk system itself to Ukraine, but they might share some technologies that could help Ukraine. To upgrade Ukraine's existing long-range missiles to the level where they can actually threaten strikes on Moscow and, very importantly, can bypass Russian air defense systems. That's why this story is definitely not over yet. And the more Russia provokes NATO countries, the greater the chances that Ukraine will actually receive truly long-range cruise missiles to strike at Moscow itself. And then there was news that could push NATO or Donald Trump himself to provide Ukraine with powerful missiles. Belarus has already deployed Orishnik on its territory to guarantee its security. This is reported by Russian media, citing the words of the country's foreign minister. Well, and these missiles, as you understand, are aimed precisely at Europe, which is the largest part of NATO. So I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone. Subtitles by Dima Korzak.